Hey guys, welcome to the second part here. We're staying with the NBA because I think with the NBA season coming up, and obviously with Woj, that's probably the biggest news in sports media. Um, I will say this: the next biggest headline I remember seeing is Karl Anthony Towns. Now, Karl Anthony Towns, to me, he got traded from the Timberwolves to the New York Knicks, so from one contender to another. Minnesota was at like a cap threshold. I think they were near the luxury tax. So they had to make some moves. Now, Julius Randle has, I think, a $31 million, somewhere in that $30 million range. And then he has a player option for next year. So basically, you're giving up Towns, basically, for a more nimble Julius Randle. However, DiVincenzo is going the other way, too. And then there's a couple of other concessions, of course. But the motion of it, let's look at it from the New York Knicks standpoint. Now, the New York Knicks starting five, potentially, looks like it's Brunson, Bridges, Josh Hart, Karl Anthony Towns at the five. I mean, they're looking pretty fucking lethal right now. Are they as good as the Celtics? No. But I'll tell you exactly this, though. At least now they have someone that can match up with Porzingis. That was a problem for them. Now, in my opinion, I think what Philadelphia has is a little bit more stable with Tyrese Maxey, Paul George, and Joel Embiid, if those guys stay healthy, considering the guys that they have next to them. New York, I think, with that backcourt of Bridges, Hart, and Brunson, that three-man backcourt, you're going to do a lot with that backcourt, for sure. I think the Knicks improved very quickly. Jalen Brunson is I've always been big on Jalen Brunson. I never understood why Dallas didn't see enough to keep him. They would have won the title last year had they had Brunson. I can tell you that right now as a Celtics fan. This is one of those things where I think the trade, it's going to look like the Knicks won this trade going away. However, I don't think we can discount the offseason that the Minnesota Timberwolves have had. Now, before I get to Minnesota, I think actually it matters more from the Minnesota point of view. So obviously Towns being the number one pick, all that sentimental crap, we don't care about that. That's the emotional side of it. We don't care about that. What we do care about is the optics of it. Trading a guy who, again, is not a five. You have Rudy Gobert, the big contract. You have a young core of Anthony Edwards. You have a veteran point guard in Mike Conley, and part of that young core, you just drafted Rob Dillingham from the Spurs, where they traded that draft pick from the Spurs. And Dillingham is nice. Terrence Shannon, who, before his whole controversy of criminal charges, and I think it was Kansas or Illinois. It was Kansas, I think. Before all that shenanigans, he was looking like a top 15, top 20 draft pick. And then, of course, the court process played out from there. And there was a lot of media shenanigans for Illinois because he was suspended. He had to sue the school. So I think shenanigans is appropriate. But again, again, these are things that happen. Something that if you want to read into it yourself, go into it. I remember following at The Athletic, but the charges were eventually dropped. He ended up having Illinois to a tournament run. He gets drafted in the second round here. And that's a good fit in Minnesota. Now they also have Jaden McDaniels, who's pretty good in his own right. So they have three forwards. If Shannon and Dillingham both develop, they have three forwards that are all 6'8" and are very long and athletic. And, of course, with Shannon, he can put the ball in the hole. Dillingham, I mean, that dude, if he can develop his skills, he's got the ability to be a very good player in the NBA. Conley's a veteran point guard. He knows what he's doing. DiVincenzo now joins that backcourt as the third guard. So now you can have Ant, maybe they use Ant at the one in some instances. But that's a very good move for Minnesota. Minnesota went out and got shooters. Julius Randle, I think, is a weird fit because much like Antoine Walker, when I grew up as a Celtics fan, Antoine Walker, that 2001-2002 Celtics team, very comparable to that Knicks team in the playoffs the last couple of years. Very comparable to the Knicks teams. Because you can compare Brunson to a young Pierce. And you can look at Julius Randle as Antoine Walker. The two never meshed. I don't care what Celtics fans say. Those two were great players, individuals. They were not team players. They did not work as a duo. That was not an effective duo. That was never going to win you anything long term. And obviously the Celtics learned the hard way halfway through the 0-3 season when they realized that trading Joe Johnson was the mistake and not Paul Pierce. Now, Joe Johnson and Paul Pierce might have had the same outcome. But again, keep in mind, like Antoine Walker, Julius Randle's a guy that needs the ball in his hand. He can make shots. But again, he falls into that ISO mode. And again, with the foul trouble, Antoine used to irritate me with the way he would commit fouls early in games, especially in the first quarter. He would have 2 fouls in the first 5 minutes in some random game against Charlotte. Then he'd come back in the third quarter and drop 20 points. But then, like, there's no rhythm in the freaking game. So you need Paul to kind of save you. So at that point, that's pretty much where it was. Now, the Knicks right now, with Mikal Bridges, at least have a third option. And you could even say Josh Hart is a solid number 4 option. So they have the ability to put the ball in the hole. And the Knicks have Tibbs, who's going to make sure defensively they're going to be the way they are. Now, if Towns can hold up the entire season, be healthy come playoff time, depending on what they get from Mitchell Robinson, the Knicks are going to be a 2 or a 3 seed in the East with Philly. I think Boston, Philly, and New York are probably the 3 best teams in the East right now. I like Orlando. We'll see what happens with Miami. I don't believe in Miami right now. Atlanta is interesting because Atlanta's obviously they traded Dejounte Murray and they got a couple of changes there, but they have a couple of good players too, though. So there's that, and then Cleveland obviously with Donovan Mitchell and I can't forget them too. So I think those are the 6. Indiana's a 7. And then, Toronto's going to admit they're rebuilding. Charlotte's rebuilding. Washington's rebuilding. Chicago is an interesting situation because they're trying to trade Zach LaVine. So the Knicks they did the cap loophole. I hate the salary cap. I think the salary caps are stupid in sports. Why are you going to cap people's income? They don't tell CEOs how much they can make. CEOs make whatever they want. Players should make whatever they want. Owners make whatever they want. That's it. It's an unsolicited market. That's what keeps everything going. So that's how it looks in the NBA right now. The Knicks, are they better than Philly? I don't think so. Because I think with Maxey, George, and Embiid, now, if they're ever fully healthy, that's a scary team. But I think that's what gives the Knicks the nod. In the Western Conference, I still think they'd be the 2nd or 3rd best team. But I also forgot about Milwaukee. How did I forget about Milwaukee, man? So you have Milwaukee, Boston, Philly, and New York. Yeah, those are the top 4 teams. Indiana 5, Orlando 6. Yeah, I mean, again, it's crazy how the Eastern Conference isn't total trash now. Grew up my whole life with the Eastern Conference not being very good. So how Cat's going to handle New York, I'm not really too worried about that, seeing as, Karl Anthony Towns is Dominican. New York has a big Dominican community. New York City itself, of course. So I think they'll support Cat very unconditionally. I'm expecting a big season. Now for Minnesota, I think if they can flip Julius Randle at the deadline, they can maximize the value of that trade. Because there will be teams, like the Atlanta Hawks, for example, that could be looking for a sidekick for Trae Young. Now, I think Julius Randle will be a disaster. But I think if Atlanta's desperate enough to not have if the GM's desperate enough to not get fired, that could really work. Excited to see it. Stay tuned in the NBA, guys. It's going to be coming up soon. The preseason's starting. And if you're a hockey fan, stay tuned for hockey as well, because R.I.P. Johnny Gaudreau. But yeah, no, it's going to be cool.